Now to your questions. Someone asks, what can you do when you feel like your coworkers don't like you?
That's a good one. I'm going to address it kind of generally, and I might not say what you expect. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're right, and I think sometimes if you were to go to a therapist and you would say, "I think my coworkers don't like me," the therapist would probably start to say, "Oh, I'm sure that's not true," and start to give you all kinds of reasons. But in truth, sometimes people don't like us, and so I think in general, not trying too hard to win people over who just may not be your people is probably the first thing I would recommend, because sometimes that's what we do. We have a sense that someone doesn't like us and we think that we need to make them like us. It can be a colossal waste of time. But the other thing is, what are we basing that on? Are we basing it on our behaviors? Are we basing it on whether they include us in things? Are we base it on the fact that maybe they seek out other people in the office, but they don't seek us out? And are we willing to initiate? When we wait for other people to include us, we may be in for a long wait because maybe everyone else in the office has been there a long time and you're the newcomer. If you are excluded from things, while I understand that triggers rejection sensitivity, there are ways that you can open things up and test it out. I think sometimes just letting people know, hey, I'm going to be going to such and such, deli for lunch. Anyone want to come? And risking being turned down, but going anyway. I think what we tend to do is when we have the belief that people don't like us, we stop putting ourselves out. We stop initiating, we stop offering because we're trying to protect ourselves. But that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy too. So I think in ways that feel as low risk as possible, initiate. And sometimes that might mean you bring a pizza in to the office if you can afford that. If it's important to you to be included at the office, I think it might be something that you have to take responsibility for initiating and then test it out.
I love that. I love those suggestions. Bringing in food. People love free food.
They do.
Um, Someone says, my boss talks to me in a disrespectful manner. How do I counter this?
Mm. Yeah, that's a tough one because sometimes we feel disrespected by someone who isn't actually disrespecting us.
Mm.
Sometimes it's a cultural difference. Sometimes it's a communication style difference. Sometimes we don't realize that this person actually reminds us of an authority figure in our life that we felt disrespected by. So there's so many different things. My therapy background tells me it's usually not so simple as we might guess, but it is possible that we have a disrespectful boss because not all of them are good ones. I think you have a number of options, and one of them is saying, I'm not sure what you mean by that." And not like, why, if you say, like, why are you talking to me that way? Obviously, that's confrontational and they're going to get defensive or going to pretend they don't know what you're talking about. But when they say something that you feel is disrespectful, if you could say, I'm not sure what you mean by that. You're being curious, you're being respectful, and you're giving them an opportunity to kind of pause in the moment and rethink what they said and how they said it. If they come back with something that feels equally disrespected, it might be time to be thinking about, whether you need support from HR, whether other people have this experience with that individual. Sometimes we really get very narrowly focused and start thinking very black and white about something. And what can really be helpful is noticing, do other people experience that from this person? And if not, what is it about my relationship with this person where this is present? Sometimes we are interpreting things wrong. Sometimes we're projecting things. And sometimes we're picking up on something that is actually there that hasn't been acknowledged. If you feel brave enough to do this, and I have known people who've done this, You might say, sometimes I get the feeling that you don't care much for me. That sounds like a very high risk situation, but sometimes it can be an absolute game changer. Because if you like the job and you want to stay in the job, but you are struggling with a boss that you feel is disrespectful, sometimes you need to test whether the relationship can improve by asking an open ended question. Sometimes I get the feeling you don't care much for me. You don't say you don't hate me. And I wouldn't actually use the term respect because that is a really tricky word that might trigger the boss. I hope that helps.
That's amazing. That's an amazing response. And if I heard that, I think I would, maybe the person isn't even aware of their tone or what makes them feel that they've been disrespectful. And it's, you just jump back and you say, wow, okay. Um, that's a great response. Someone asks, I really struggle with managing anxiety and guilt when I'm behind in my work, which
Mm.
usually makes me paralyzed and further behind. Do you have any concrete tips to get over this hurdle and not allow the paralysis to take over?
I would say it depends on whether you're behind in your work because you are having difficulty managing your time and responsibilities, or whether you're behind in your work because the expectations are unrealistic about what human beings can get done, or because priorities and expectations are not communicated well. So if it's, and I understand when we procrastinate, we don't get started on time. We're perfectionists, so we don't wrap things up on time. We have time blindness, so we lose track of when the thing was due to begin with. And then we feel guilt and shame about all of this, which doesn't help things get wrapped up either. So if it's us, Attitude has so many wonderful resources for dealing with procrastination, perfectionism, all of that. If it's on the other side, though, so I'm not going to go into that because there's so many resources, through this organization that we can take advantage of already. Sometimes we need to be having more frequent reminders. Sometimes we need to ask for more reminders of when things are due. Sometimes we need to ask, what is the priority here? Because I am unable to get all of these things done within the time limit. And sometimes we're just not getting clear information from our supervisors about what the real priorities are. Most of the time bosses know when they're giving people too much work, and when they're not being clear about what is the number one thing to get finished and do that first and then do this and then do that, we don't end up completing any of them, and then we think it's on us. So I would just say in conclusion for this question, if it's because of your own time management issues, then giving yourself systems, structures, and accountability to help with that helps reduce the anxiety and guilt. It's the guilt part is what I'm kind of focusing on, because are we feeling guilty because we didn't do what we needed to do when we needed to do it? And on the other side, many workplaces have unclear expectations and don't remind people when things are done. They just spring it on them. And if that's the case, we can absolutely ask on a regular basis, you've given me all these things. What is the top priority? What is the most urgent deadline here? And then plan our work accordingly.
Okay. Someone says, how do you move past shame from failures at work? I've had so many.
Mm. Well, the bottom line is learning to practice radical self acceptance. And that is something that takes time to teach ourselves that we actually get to think and believe whatever we want about ourselves. We don't think that's true, but actually, if you've ever met a person who makes tons of mistakes, shames themselves left and right, and still manages to have pretty healthy self-esteem, they know something that most of us don't know. And that is this: we actually get to decide whether we can like, love, accept, and approve of ourselves, regardless of the mistakes we make. But most of us think that making mistakes invalidates us. and denies our ability to accept ourselves. So I think there's a lot of great self-love techniques that we can use, and we need to make a decision that we deserve to forgive ourselves. No one can make that decision for us, and we can never make up for mistakes enough to prove ourselves that it would be acceptable for us not to feel shame. It really comes down to a decision. One of my favorite techniques is to practice affirmations on a regular basis. Affirmations are not new, but they really do work if we do them. And there's an app that I recommend called Think Up. There's a free version and a paid version. The free version is really fine. And you choose the affirmations that you repeat on a regular basis. I tell people, repeat them in the morning, just let it play. It's you record them in your own voice on this app. So it's your voice that's saying positive things to you. It's the same voice that's usually talking you know what to yourself with. So you're literally overriding those negative beliefs and negative self-talk by practicing new ones. You really will find over time that your opinion of yourself does start to shift, and no one can do this for you. It's an inside job.
Wow. Someone asked, do you believe someone with ADHD should let their manager or colleagues know they have ADHD? Might this help or hurt these key workplace relationships, especially around considerations of managing emotions? And she also says, this is incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is an excellent, excellent question. And I think a lot of people think about it kind of in a all or nothing way. Like, I need to go disclose my ADHD to HR and then tell everybody, this is who I am and this is how I am. And these are all the problems that I have. And this is the kind of help I need. In most cases, that is not a good idea because unfortunately, here we are in 2025. And while there are so many more resources for knowledge about ADHD, there is still quite a bit of myth, stigma, and misunderstanding. So I wouldn't necessarily have a blanket, yeah, tell everybody because, knowledge is power. What I would say in most cases is that letting people know what you need without actually naming the ADHD in most cases is going to be more effective. For example, how I might do it is, and this actually happened, real story. I was at work, somebody intercepted me in the ladies' room and said, "Oh, Diann Wingert, just who I wanted to talk to." And they started telling me something. And I dried my hands, turned to them and said, "I'm much better at responding to written requests. Would you mind shooting me an email when you get back to your office?" And I didn't say, "Hey, I have ADHD and I have a terrible working memory, and I'm probably going to completely forget this conversation ever happened. So would you mind?" Not necessary. I'm saying, "Hey, this is what I need." Or, "Boss, would it be possible for me to skip this particular meeting because 3 meetings back to back on Wednesday mornings make it really hard for me to be productive on Wednesday afternoons?" Asking for what we need based on our self-awareness and really treating it like it's a no big deal in most cases is so much more effective than disclosing our ADHD to people that may or may not be able to understand it and may or may not be able to accept us as a result.
Someone asked, what's the best way to handle a micromanaging boss?
Quit. No, just kidding. Actually, and I'm only half kidding, to be honest with you, because some micromanaging, sometimes it's just a person's style and they don't really realize they're doing it. Sometimes it's just a really controlling person that just does not trust people and believes that if they're not constantly hovering over you, you're not going to do the work. You're probably not going to change that person's mind. Now, if they're micromanaging you and they're not micromanaging others, that's information. And that information may be because we miss deadlines or we ask questions repeatedly that they've already answered, things that are probably related to our ADHD. So I would pay attention to what we're calling a micromanaging boss. Look around and see, are they micromanaging others or just me? And in what ways are they micromanaging me? Are they asking me repeatedly, hey, did you send that report? Hey, where are you on the XYZ project? That may indicate that they have picked up on the fact that we might procrastinate. We might be focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time. We might not communicate where we are in a project that involves other people. And that's something we can then take responsibility for and communicate more proactively, which, if that's the scenario, they have much less need to micromanage. Sometimes what we call micromanaging is somebody trying to work with our ADHD tendencies. And if that is the case, we can say, hey, I noticed that you send me a lot more reminders, or you stop by my desk a lot more often, or you ask me frequently where I am on a particular project. Would it be helpful if I regularly update you? Would it be helpful if I send you a weekly update on where I am on each of my priority projects? If you do that, though, make sure you schedule that, make sure you give yourself a notification, and make sure you actually do it.
Okay, very proactive.
Yeah.
Someone says, what if your bosses or colleagues are bullying you?
If it's genuine bullying, you need to go to HR,
Mm-hmm.
because that is, and we're not just talking one person. You use the plural.
Yeah.
So if it's one person, that may be a problematic employee that needs to be dealt with. If it's multiple, in my experience in the workplace, that is evidence of a toxic workplace culture where the management is not ensuring safety. And so if you have an HR department, if it's something that's been going on, I would say it's most likely something you have to involve them with. And you might frankly need to leave, because there are toxic workplace cultures, and unfortunately far too many of them. And putting ourselves in a situation where we are being bullied, or even because of our justice sensitivity and environmental sensitivity, maybe we're not the one being bullied, but we see other people around us being bullied, that may disrupt our executive functioning and dysregulate our emotions just as effectively as if it was happening to us. And that may not be something that we can learn to manage. That might be something we actually need to avoid.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. So that has to be our last question. Diann, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with our ADHD community. We really appreciate it.